Hello again, welcome to Zestology. Normally I record these podcast intros out and about around London, but there's no normal at the moment, is there? Isolation and self-isolation has become an actual thing. So I'm in the rather tinny surroundings of my garden shed, where I'm recording this podcast intro for you. And what strange and uncertain and weird and frankly downright distressing times we live in at the moment. It's been a very challenging last 7 days since I last spoke to you on this podcast for humanity. That's the mad thing, isn't it? We're all in this, and it doesn't really seem to be getting any better. I said last week that I've kind of thrown the Zestology schedule out the window a bit. This podcast, after all, is about health and wellness and well-being. And the world is facing a health crisis the likes of which it hasn't faced for over 100 years. So I wanted to kind of focus on that. But I did mention in last week's Zestology, but also in my newsletter, that I was really interested in your suggestion and your suggestions on what I should be covering on the podcast. And I've had some really interesting responses, actually. One or two that have really made me think. A lot of you said you would like me to focus on immunity, which is the subject of today's podcast, immunity, science and health, because as this pandemic continues to escalate, Dr. Jeff Rediger is the person to talk to, I think. I felt so much better after talking to him, and I hope you feel better after listening to him as well. He's a medical director for a psychiatric hospital, as you'll hear. He's also an instructor in psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. He has a master's from Princeton and publishes in the field of medicine, psychiatry and spirituality. He's just brought out a book called Cured, which looks at spontaneous healing and what happens when people are given 6 months or 6 weeks to live and then somehow manage to turn it around. We were supposed to be meeting in person in London this week, and obviously that's not happened. He's had to cancel his whole book tour. But because of his unique background in terms of physical and mental well-being and scientific background, he's very much in demand. And we recorded this podcast just before he was about to do an interview for the BBC. His book is out this week, Cured, and it's been reviewed in The Guardian and The Telegraph and lots of other places as well. I think the Washington Post too. And I really think listening to Dr. Jeff, you will start to think about the small changes you can make to start to feel better. It's so hard to switch off at the moment, isn't it? It's so hard to do all the things we know work. It is really hard to stop looking at The Guardian and Twitter and get the latest updates on how horrendous everything is. And yet, there does come a point when more information doesn't make you more able to cope. It might make you better informed, but it doesn't make you better able to cope. I asked the question, what would you like me to focus on? Bearing in mind I've kind of torn up the podcast schedule a little bit over the next few weeks. I had some exciting podcasts recorded with excellent guests, but right now there's one thing on everyone's mind. So as a health podcast, I want to reflect that, but I also want to focus on what you'd like to listen to. One of the responses that really made me think was Lindsay, who works for the NHS, the National Health Service in this country, right at the front line of everything going on at the moment. And she said, I'm actually craving podcasts that are talking about something other than COVID-19, especially ones that give me real practical hints and tips on relaxation, the wonders of wildlife and so on. She also said, don't underestimate the power of distraction. It may feel that you're not dealing with the big stuff, but what people need right now is normality. And a regular Monday podcast is part of my routine. And then she says, stay safe and don't forget to wash those hands. So Lindsay, thank you for that. And lots of thought-provoking podcasts. Some of the podcasts that I had recorded, we may well bring out over the next few weeks. But at the moment, a slightly different schedule. And Lindsay, I've taken that on board. And I really hope this does give you some practical hints and tips on relaxation and, the wonders of wildlife. Definitely down with that. I mean, certainly in some countries, you're not even allowed to leave the house, which we may well be getting. We might even have that in this country by the time you listen to this, but I'm recording this just a couple of days before it goes out, so we'll see. Shout out to my sponsors for this podcast, Bioptimizers. I mean, in some ways, it's come at quite a good time. I was, focusing on a fairly light-hearted, fun look at gut immunity over the month of March and maybe April as well. Immunity's become a lot more serious, hasn't it? And a lot more pressing for us. So in some ways, a good time to be partnering up with Bioptimizers and really looking after the gut. They've got a whole range of great supplements, especially their probiotics. And their probiotics are really strong and powerful and good on the gut. And I've really been enjoying the supplements that you take while you eat as well, which helps you to digest the food. And if you don't believe them, they've got an incredible video on their site which shows you the difference between some steak that goes into a normal stomach and some steak that goes into a stomach having taken some Bioptimizers tablets as well. It just breaks it down so much easier. If you want 10% off, you can go to bioptimizers.com/zestology. Right then, I'll be back at the end of the podcast, but for now, this will make you, I think, just feel a little bit more optimistic and a little bit more focused about what's needed in these coming weeks and months. Here is Dr. Jeff Rediger on Zestology.
So I'm the medical director at a psychiatric hospital, McLean Hospital. I am the chief of behavioral medicine at Good Samaritan Hospital, a large urban medical center here in the Boston area. I'm on the faculty of Harvard Medical School, and I'm fascinated by the workings of the physical body. I also went to Princeton Seminary prior to medical school and went deep into theology and philosophy of science. So that's my background.
Yeah. And so in the kind of psychiatric hospitals and areas in which you're working, are you directly seeing the influence of coronavirus and coronavirus patients at the moment, or is that a slightly different area of hospitals and medicine?
Well, we're feeling the effects, and a lot of our administrative meetings and our efforts to help staff and work with patients and sort out visitors, all of that, sort out any early signs of symptoms with patients. It's taking a lot of our energy these days, just trying to figure out how to keep patients safe and staff safe.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of your patients would be more vulnerable physically as well as mentally, which is why it's just so difficult, isn't it?
Absolutely. Many of the patients that we take care of, both medically and psychiatrically, of course, have a lot going on for them and have a lot of immune compromised medical diseases.
Yeah. So obviously it's really interesting because you've been looking at disease and illness from a physical and mental perspective, very much in the kind of creating of your book over the last year or two. What are your kind of initially? What are your thoughts about coronavirus and how this is an epidemic, a pandemic, which has taken over the world like nothing else in our lifetimes?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about that because I'm very interested in the immune system. We have a brilliant immune system with all these cell subtypes and all these specialized cells that want to keep us healthy, but there's a lot more than we can be doing to unleash the superpowers of our immune system, and I'm very interested in helping people do that. We have a long history in the West of this philosophy of basically nuke the germ, and that's important. And antibiotics and are life-saving and really important as are vaccines, but there's a whole other side to this about how to strengthen our immune system, and we could do much better than we are doing, and there's an opportunity here to do that. And then the other side, this is not just an immunologic crisis around the world. This is also a psychiatric crisis. People are feeling a lot of anxiety, and the fear and panic is actually driving more devastation and worrisome results for a lot of people. And so we want to find ways to calm down the anxiety and help us all realize we're in this together, and there's things we can do to help each other and stay connected with each other. And that's really important during this time.
Yeah. And that's a concept that I know from my own experience that is very hard to grasp. The reason I do this podcast is, I don't know if you know, because obviously this interview was set up by someone else originally, wasn't it? But I originally contracted a virus about 6 years ago. On holiday in Asia,
Really?
and I had months off work. And eventually the thing that really made a difference for me was going to see an emotional freedom therapy practitioner. And he specialized in fatigue. And he said, actually, I have to tell you that it's really hard for people to grasp this when they first come to see me, but part of what's going on in your mind is causing this problem. And that concept that we have physical ailments which might be really serious, but we can make it worse with the way that we think, is so hard to come to terms with without feeling a little bit woo-woo. But it's true, isn't it?
It's absolutely true. And I think the front lines of medicine are starting to begin to incorporate an understanding of this. We've had a division between mind and body historically for several hundred years in our culture at least. And what's great is those old harsh dualisms and polarities are starting to break down. And we're realizing that the thoughts we have, the feelings we have, how we feel about ourselves and the world at a very deep level, those affect us a lot, and they unleash a really different kind of biochemistry.
The problem at the moment is it is such an anxious time. It's not just the health aspect. We have most leaders around the world are invoking imagery and language of war, and many people are losing their jobs and are worried where the next, where the next meal is going to come from, and about loved ones. It's just such an anxious time, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And yet we know that if a person's body is in fight, flight, or freeze, you're going to be unleashing stress hormones onto your body and your immune cells that actually numb the immune cells and cause them to behave in a sluggish fashion. And if we can help people stay connected, stay in a state where they can be genuinely sharing love with each other and connection, it doesn't have to be just with your close loved ones. If you see the postman, if you see a person on the street, but to smile and make a little friendly connection, that unleashes a biochemistry that is great for your immune system, that protects you more from catching illnesses. It helps your body heal and thrive. It unleashes oxytocin, the bonding molecule, serotonin, the antidepressant and anti-anxiety molecule, dopamine, the pleasure pathway. All of these are really good for our bodies, and it's a really different physiology, and it fires up the immune system.
Yeah, okay, and so we'll talk more about that in a sec, because I'm feeling better already. I really am, and despite your position really at the front line of medicine and psychiatry, you seem to me like you've got a kind of a demeanour and a disposition which is a fairly sunny one. So I want to talk more about how, actionable things we can do in just a second. But globally, is there, what the problem is that no one's feeling like that at the moment, are they? No one is in the mood for actually, many people aren't in the mood to do all the things they know are good for them, and they don't want to be told to come and cheer up.
Right. It's true. Yeah. And so it needs to be not something of just trying to cheer ourselves up, but we need to focus on things that are actionable, that we can do, that are positive for us, for our health. We can focus on putting great nutrition into our bodies that fires up the immune system. We can do a lot of things to help reduce our stress or change the focus on our stress for what's positive and life-giving and connecting with others.
Is your work kind of quite similar to the work of Louise Hay or Joe Dispenza? They talk about, you can heal yourself and you are the placebo and that kind of thing. Is that quite similar?
I'm not that familiar with their work, but what I do know is it sounds like they've done some very positive stuff and do great research. I think that it's important to understand you can't just think positive thoughts when you're really feeling something else. If you're trying to think positive thoughts, but you have a lot of fear underneath that, or if you have a subconscious that really is afraid, you need to find ways to diminish the power of your fearful thoughts in a realistic way, and that is grounded in reality, and that takes account of the difficult experiences or the traumas that you've been through in your life and that sort of thing, that really helps lower your anxiety in a real way, and not just trying to put positive thoughts on top of a more fearful layer, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, yeah. That's me at the moment.
Yeah,
I know meditation is good, but I'd meditate and I'd close my eyes and I just think about the latest kind of death toll, really. I mean, it's very, very hard.
yes, it is for many of us.
Yeah. And I mean, have you seen with your patients, I mean, what kind of thing have you seen in terms of changing the way that they think and in terms of their healing, their physical healing?
Well, that's a great question. And let me try this and see if you want to ask some more questions and we can walk around this big topic. So you're asking about changing thoughts. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Well, I'm asking about changing thoughts and then the healing that arises from changing those thoughts.
Yeah. So I talk in here about the 4 pillars of health and well-being. And certainly one of the pillars is about changing our focus. So we start to see what is right and good about ourselves and our life. We do become our thoughts in some ways. We all inherit these beliefs from childhood, from our parents, from kids on the playground, from colleagues at work, from our loved ones. And some of these beliefs and thoughts about ourselves and the world we live in are true and genuinely empowering, but other thoughts and beliefs are false and disempowering. And a lot of these thoughts and beliefs are unexamined. And it's very empowering to begin really looking carefully at what we assume to be true about the universe and ourselves and question that and then strengthen the ones that are true. And I think I've seen one of the most common things that people have said to me in the context of recovering from their illness is that it took an illness for them to wake up and realize they needed to stop taking care of everyone else. They needed to stop responding to the perceived expectations of others and begin focusing instead on what creates life and well-being within them. And so the question becomes, what puts a light in your eyes? What helps you come alive and know your value and your purpose as a human being? And to be able to focus on what's good and right about you instead of questioning all the time, consciously or subconsciously, whether you're good enough, whether you measure up, and that sort of thing. And so those are really important questions. It's fascinating to me that when a person gets a life-ending diagnosis and are told that they have 6 months or 12 months to live, there's many people who will be devastated by that at one level, but will also be so relieved at another level because they'll say, oh, I can do what I really want to do with my life now. I don't have to go to med school because mom and dad really want that for me, for example, or I don't have to take care of everyone else in my extended family now because I can finally have an excuse to focus on myself. And that turns into a life-giving, a dramatic change in life for people. And that begins to become the doorway into a different life. And it becomes very healing.
Yeah. And I mean, obviously, I feel like this message is a message that people who listen to this podcast are going to say, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. But in the global context of what's going on at the moment, and I know you're about to do an interview with the BBC this afternoon and you're very in demand. I mean, obviously you've had to cancel your book tour, but in some ways it's very interesting that your book's coming out at this time because people need this information. How much, obviously you're rigorously medically qualified, but how much pushback do you get from establishment types, news anchors like myself, who might say, that's all very well, but you basically tell people not to worry when they get a terminal diagnosis, or even in the context of coronavirus, you know, this hideous virus that threatens their livelihoods, especially if their immune system is compromised in some ways. How much pushback do you get on your message?
I haven't had a lot yet. I expect I will at some point. I think what's true is I work in a hospital every day, and I see and feel how patients feel like they need something more in their healthcare. And I see how the doctors and the healthcare providers I work with feel the same way. And many of us feel trapped in a system that isn't giving people the tools for the vitality and the well-being that they really want. We too often focus on the disease and we focus on prescribing medications, but what people want is to feel the vitality and the wholeness and the goodness of who they are. And that is such a healing path for people. And so I think if a person has a medical problem, we send them to the medical doctor. If a person has a psychological problem, we send them to the psychotherapist. If a person has a spiritual problem, we send them to the priest, rabbi, imam, or minister. And that's all brilliant and really helpful. But if the experts that a person is consulting in any of those fields doesn't step back and not only do the part that they're working with, the body part, for example, if it's a doctor you're seeing, if they don't also step back and see the forest for the trees and see this living person and the story of their life and what is really going on for them, the stress that's affecting them, the opportunities that they have and long to create in their lives, then they're missing the real opportunity for healing at a deeper level. And so I believe in specialization because it's a brilliant way that the West has developed this fantastic culture that we have. We just have to get a lot better at stepping back and helping people see the big picture. And we need to encourage patients to integrate the other aspects of their being into a life that really makes sense and that honors the dignity and the value of what they bring into the world.
Mm. And I mean, when it comes to coronavirus, we're all patients in a sense because we're all feeling this stress. I mean, I wonder what you think about bearing in mind what you just said about the official response to what's going on at the moment. Obviously, there's a great focus on either finding vaccines or finding medicine. There isn't, right. I mean, there is an acknowledgement that this is an extremely stressful time for a lot of people, but there isn't that much focus on an official response to the stress that not only people are feeling sat in the homes listening to this podcast when they'd normally be at the gym, but also people who might already be ill or might have that immune system, which means they're more worried about getting ill.
Yes, I think what's really exciting is the new research that's developing that really goes back and re-examines our whole pathway around the way we have treated diseases for the last few hundred years. Vaccines and antibiotics are really important and they are life-saving, but they're not the whole story. We know that the flu vaccine, for example, doesn't catch a lot of the cases of the flu. The flu has a number of variants. They can mutate rapidly. And so vaccines and medications are important, but they're not a silver bullet. They don't fix the whole story. And if you go back and look at the whole development of this, Louis Pasteur was the father of the germ theory because he definitively proved that germs exist. Before that, we thought that illnesses just disappear. They just appeared out of the blue. He proved that germs exist and that they're the cause of illness. So the philosophy that he advocated was basically kill the germ. But there was colleagues named Claude Bernard and Antoine Béchamp who argued with him for his entire professional life and said, no, that's not true. We all are surrounded by viruses and bacteria, millions of them all the time, inside and outside of our bodies. And they only become invaders when something in our body breaks down. And so they argued that the problem is not the germ. The problem is that we allow diseased tissue to develop in our bodies because we don't take care of our immune systems, and that creates a lot of problems for us. So he said mosquitoes don't create a stagnant pond. Mosquitoes are attracted to a stagnant pond. Yeah. And so treat the cause of things, create a vital, healthy immune system, and you won't have a problem at near the same level with viruses and bacteria. And so Dr. Bernard drank a glass of cholera, which caused the cholera plague. He drank the glass of cholera in front of his students to prove his point. And of course, he didn't get sick because he understood how to unleash the power the immune system, and he knew that's where the focus needs to be. That is what we are now starting to realize with the research around the microbiome, and that all of these bacteria and other microbes and pathogens that we carry in our bodies, there's an important positive role for them too, and just taking a vaccine or an antibiotic or an antiviral doesn't deal with the deeper issue. So I'm very interested in helping people create strong immune systems.
Well, that sounds absolutely, just couldn't be more relevant for this time, could it? Just interrupting this podcast for one moment. Yeah, I'm back in the shed to remind you that this podcast is brought to you by Bioptimizers, and that's spelt with a Z, by the way. And if you suffer from digestive issues like gas, bloating, cramping, you could benefit from a high quality enzyme and a very specific type of probiotic, and luckily Bioptimizers sell both. Obviously, immunity on everybody's minds at the moment, and as you've been hearing from Dr. Jeff, it so is important to get the gut right. If you get the gut right, what you eat and how you digest it, everything else starts to fall into place. So their probiotics, P3OM, use a patented and natural process, and Masszymes are a full spectrum enzyme formula with more protease. I think that's how it's pronounced. It's not proteases, it's protease. Anyway, one of the two. I might well be getting it wrong. I've been taking them though, and they're good, and I've been having them with every meal. You're supposed to take 3 with a meal. So I started with 1, and that was fine. And then I took 2, and that was fine. Now I'm taking 3 with every meal. So if you want to go to bioptimizers.com/zestology, that's bioptimizers with z.com/zestology, you will get 10% off. And you can use the code Zestology10 if you're not sure if it's working or not. But the code Zestology10 will get you 10% off. And that includes, if you're in the UK, you can go to bioptimizers.co.uk and use the code Zestology10 to get 10% off as well. That's it. Back to the show. I know you quote a lot of clinical trials, and you look at a lot of scientific evidence, and you also presumably look at history and perhaps how we dealt with these things in the past, before the last few hundred years, where the received wisdom of our elders would be important in terms of dealing with health and sickness as well. What are some of the things that we can do then?
I think it's so important to get out of fight or flight and find ways to really connect with each other. I think this is a time when a lot of people are more isolated, and we need to remember that we can really be connected with those in our lives. And again, like we said a few minutes ago, it doesn't just have to be with our loved ones, but find ways to connect in a genuine and authentic way, in a way letting people know you appreciate them, letting people know that you have empathy for what they're dealing with, and let's just try to be in this together. That unleashes a really different physiology in your body that is healing, and that allows your immune system to work crisply and efficiently with all these different cells.
So connecting with our loved ones and people close to us, even if we can't do it physically at the moment.
That's right. Yeah, and do it by Skype, do it by FaceTime, do it by telephone, do it even if you have to do it from 3 to 6 feet away. Just make sure it's an authentic connection and let the person really share with them something, even if it's brief and somebody you don't know well. I think it's also really important to improve the nutrition in our bodies right now. Get rid of processed foods, sugars, and refined flours. Those are highly inflammatory, and they do weaken the immune system. And right now we need a lot of fruits and vegetables. I'm a big fan of vegetable smoothies. I think they're great. I think it's one way to just flood your system with all the micronutrients and the phytochemicals that are fabulous for your body. And it's fine to eat meat, but eat animals that were happy when they were alive, not flooded with stress hormones. Grass-fed so that you get the healthier fats, and not pumped full of chemicals. And so avoid toxins, don't over-medicate, get plenty of rest. Those kinds of things are really important right now.
And in terms of your patients, the people that you look after in your hospital, presumably some of them have mental health problems which are really quite severe. How much do practices like this help them?
Oh, they're critical. They're huge. I think what's so true is that a lot of illness, both physical and mental, and I see both sides of this since I'm in both kinds of hospitals, is they have a significant component of fear, and we need to help a person focus on what's true about them, about the value they bring into the world. Remind each of us that we all have value, that we have something important to offer, and we can focus on that, and we can begin building a foundation from that that is only good for you at every level, including your immune system.
Yeah. You mentioned connection. one of the things that's so cruel about this current situation is we're being deprived of connection. I was supposed to see my mum last Sunday for Sunday lunch, and had to cancel it.
Right.
And those little connections, those little Sunday lunches, or visits, and I'm sure you've had to already, drastically cut down or even stop visits to the hospital. Those things are so important, aren't they?
They are so important, and we just made a policy today that we can't have visitors, and that's tragic at so many levels, because one of the most important things we do is help patients reconnect with loved ones and families, and to have family meetings where everyone talks about these things. We will still continue them, but they'll need to be more remote and digital or telephonic.
Yeah. One of the people that I interviewed that I love is Chris Ryan, who wrote a book called Civilized to Death, and he talks about the wisdom of the kind of a much more primal approach. And I wonder how much you looked into that in the making of your book and the work that you do in terms of communities that were, we're not talking the last couple of hundred years, we're talking way back, perhaps pre-agriculture, how we kind of shared knowledge amongst our communities then as opposed to now.
Yes, that's a great topic. It's always fascinated to me that countries like Africa have lower rates of schizophrenia and better rates of cure for schizophrenia than we do in the West, even though we have all these medications and all of these fancy treatments in hospitals. What people need is connection, and we live in a more fragmented culture.
Yeah. And just one more thing on the connection thing. We have a family member who has a very challenging mental health problem, and the problem is she doesn't want to talk on the phone. So it's really hard to, because you can't necessarily go and see her at the moment, and she doesn't want to talk on the phone. So that's
we just have to have empathy and do all we can to help people who are more isolated now.
Yeah. On a global perspective, with your kind of medical background, where do you see the next kind of 12 to 18 months going? I mean, obviously it's impossible to predict how this virus is going to pan out, but what do you foresee happening over the next few months?
Well, I'm glad that testing kits are becoming available. One of the things that's really handicapped us as physicians and medical professionals is we don't have access to the testing that we need to do right now in the United States. That's going to be changing quickly, I hope. What's a relief to me is to see that it looks like rates are going down in China, and it looks like they're able to begin easing restrictions, and maybe they're coming out on the other side of this. So hopefully that will be our path as well. We also know that as people develop herd immunity, as more people get the virus and then develop immune responses to it so they don't get it when they're exposed to it, that also is going to allow all of this to normalize and go down a path that is much more workable.
Yeah. And I think you probably know that I'm a journalist here in the UK, and I work for one of the top TV news channels. And I think a lot of people are finding that they are more plugged into the news than ever before because they need to be. But there is a point, isn't there, that we need to switch off. I mean, it's very hard to do so. But I'm finding even just an hour away from, even just chatting to you for an hour and focusing on this, I do feel better about everything.
Yeah, I think we all need to know when to turn off the news. We want to stay informed. But if the news cycles become repetitive for us, or if they're not allowing us to get out of our anxiety, out of our fight or flight into a more relaxed state that we can just share love and connection with others, you're right. Then we just need to turn it off for a while.
Yeah. Do you think on that theme, some people are genetically more prone to worrying and stressing?
Yes.
I think I am.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Some of us are wired that way because of our inheritance, because of the environments we grew up in, for a lot of complicated reasons. People survive a lot. As a psychiatrist who hears the private stories, the secret stories that people have lived with, it's shocking what many of us as human beings have survived. And it's important that we honor that and also find ways to begin detoxing ourselves from the thoughts and the beliefs and the perceptions that we picked up from those kinds of experiences.
Yeah. I think some of us have to work a little bit harder at it, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
And when you mentioned diet, do you ever look at? Obviously, I'm sure you look at all range and manner of medicines with your patients, but do you ever look at supplements as well, natural supplements, or something as simple as vitamin C or vitamin D? Do you look into that?
I do. I'm not. I tend to, in general, believe that if a person just fills their nutrition plan with really nutritionally dense foods, that you don't have to always take a lot of supplements. But myself, I take vitamin C. I have not gone deep into the research on these things because that's a whole big field in itself, and the research is complicated and controversial. I take vitamin C. I take vitamin D. I live in a part of the world that there's not always a lot of sun, and so vitamin D, I think, is a good thing to do. I take a good whole foods natural vitamin that's not a synthetic vitamin. It's a multivitamin. I do take that every day. And so I do take some supplements, but I tend to tell patients that if you eat a poor diet with a lot of processed foods and a lot of sugars, then taking a lot of supplements isn't really going to help that, because there are so many phytochemicals and micronutrients that are in those foods that you cannot get from any kind of supplement. So the main path needs to be with really healthy foods.
Yeah, I feel really inspired. My next meal is going to be a smoothie with a few berries in it, but some veggies as well.
That's awesome.
Now, something I've asked everyone on this podcast is, what is one book that you would recommend? And it can be any book. It can be fiction or non-fiction. It can be anything you like. And one tip for living with more energy and vitality.
Yes. There's two books that I'm reading right now. I'm reading Autobiography of a Yogi, which is a fabulous book and very challenging in terms of the worldview that's discussed. Spiritually, very healing and fascinating. And I'm also reading Tara Westover's book, Educated, which I think I think her book first launched in London, I believe, or outside of London and Cambridge. Yeah, and I think that also is a really important book for helping people begin putting words to some of the things that they have gone through in their lives. And there's even discussion groups about this that are helping people come to terms and find pathways around recognizing, naming their own traumas and healing from them. And I think that's all really important for helping create a healthy immune system and vitality in one's life.
Yeah, definitely. I'm mulling doing some kind of virtual book club over the next few months, because books like that sound, and yours actually as well, I just kind of think it'd be this is an opportunity to do things differently. As you said, it'd be lovely to meet up with 10 or 100 or one Zestology listener and talk about books, which just talk about anything which isn't talking about this virus that has laid low our globe for the
That's right. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. We'll see how many people sign up. But then, so what about one tip then for living with more energy and vitality?
I'd say the one tip I would recommend right now, the quickest way to begin really creating a healthy, robust immune system, is take the most common processed food in your pantry or in your life and get rid of it and replace it with something great and great tasting. I mean, it was difficult for me to make the transition a number of years ago because I had no idea how addicted I was to sugar. But once I did it, I don't ever want to go back. I lost 37 pounds just with that shift. And I think nutrition is the doorway into other changes for so many of the people that I study. It's not the only thing they do, but it's the first place they often start.
And isn't that interesting that a director for a psychiatric hospital and an instructor in psychiatry at Harvard is talking about what we eat as the number one thing you can change?
Yeah, I think it's a massive deal.
Yeah.
It's not the only thing, but it's a good place to start.
Jeff, I'm very sad we couldn't meet in person, but I hope we can at some point in the future and record another one.
I would love that.
Seriously, thanks so much, because it's been really nice to talk to you. I feel much more inspired and upbeat than I did half an hour ago. I'm definitely going to read your book. Where can people find it, and where can people find out more about what you do?
So the title of the book is Cured. It's available on Amazon and at a lot of bookstores, at many bookstores in England and London and Great Britain, I know right now. And I can be reached also on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and anything we can do to help is what we really want to do. We really want to start a movement where people can take charge of their health and feel great for doing so.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, look, you've got the BBC to do now, haven't you?
Yes.
So I will let you go and talk to the BBC. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. And we'll stay in touch. We'll do another one in person when all this is, whenever it is, we'll meet in person.
Really wonderful to meet you.
Thank you, Dr. Jeff, and thank you for listening to Zestology. Wherever you are in the world, stay safe, stay healthy, probably stay on your own, but connect to people as much as possible. Wash those hands. I'm thinking about what I can do to kind of be of service when we're all at home. And one of the things that has got me thinking is certainly Lindsay's email and a lot of other people that I've been speaking to as well. There is a need to switch off from all this depressing news, and I just wondered about setting up some kind of virtual book club, like a Zestology book club or something. So something that would be free, completely free, but something that can bring us together and provide an element of escapism. So if you think that's a good idea, let me know. I'd love to get an email, tony@tonyrighton.com. Could be fiction or non-fiction, could be escapism, or it could be self-help. What should it be? Should I do some kind of Zestology book club? I'd love to know from you, and maybe I'll do that over the coming weeks. Thanks for listening. Have as good a week as can be expected in the circumstances, and I'll speak to you again next week.